Lucas had always been drawn to the unknown, but nothing had prepared him for the envelope that appeared on his doorstep that evening. It was heavy, unmarked, and unlike any mail he had received before. Inside lay a small, ornate golden key and a single piece of parchment that read, "The room knows. Enter if you dare." At first he laughed, brushing it off as some elaborate prank, but something about the weight of the key, the smoothness of its surface, and the cryptic message gnawed at him. He called his friends, trying to show off, but even they hesitated. "Don't go, Lucas. It sounds wrong," one warned. But Lucas's curiosity, as always, overpowered caution. By midnight, he was standing at the edge of town, staring at the mansion described in the note. It rose from the darkness like a jagged shadow, half collapsed, yet somehow imposing. The wind whistled through broken windows, carrying faint echoes of laughter, or was it cries? The iron gate creaked as he pushed it open, and every instinct screamed at him to turn back. Still, he stepped forward. The mansion's interior was worse than he imagined. Dust coated every surface, cobwebs stretched across the ceiling like ghostly curtains, and the air smelled of decay and neglect. Broken furniture lay scattered, and photographs hung crookedly on the walls, the faces scratched out, leaving empty, hollow eyes that seemed to follow him. As he explored, Lucas felt the air grow colder, heavier, as if the house itself were breathing around him. Shadows moved against the walls, but every time he looked directly, they froze. And then he saw it, a door unlike the others, made of dark, polished wood, etched with strange symbols that pulsed faintly in the dim moonlight. Above it, carved letters warned, "Enter if you dare." The pull was irresistible. Heart pounding, he slid the key into the lock. The door opened silently, revealing a room that seemed almost ordinary. Plain walls, a single chair in the center, and a mirror that reflected only him. But the air felt alive, heavy with expectation, and faint whispers tickled his ears. At first, Lucas laughed nervously, trying to convince himself it was his imagination. "Get a grip, Lucas," he muttered, but the whispers grew louder, clearer, and then, impossibly, they began naming things only he knew. His childhood lies, secret fears, moments he had buried deep in shame. His laughter died in his throat. He reached for the door, intending to leave, but it slammed shut with a force that rattled the entire room. Panic surged through him. The whispers became a chorus, repeating every hidden thought he had ever tried to hide. The chair in the center of the room seemed to shift subtly, as if moving toward him, alive. Lucas realized with a sinking horror that he was not in control here. The room was alive, and worse, he had no idea how he might ever leave. Lucas stumbled backward, his eyes darting around the room. The whispers had multiplied, overlapping, forming a chorus of voices that spoke of his past with cruel precision. Each word cut deeper than a knife, dredging up memories he had spent years burying. Mistakes he thought were forgotten, lies he had told, betrayals he had committed, they all swirled around him, impossible to ignore. The walls began to shimmer like a thin layer of water rippling over them. Scenes from his life projected themselves onto the surfaces. A fight with his younger brother, a broken promise to a friend, a secret he had kept from his parents. Shadows twisted around the images, distorting them, turning familiar faces into grotesque, accusing figures. He felt sweat drip down his forehead, and his hands trembled as he tried to cover his ears, but the whispers penetrated anyway, whispering secrets he had never spoken aloud, even to himself. Then the mirror began to change. At first, it reflected only him, wide-eyed and terrified. Slowly, the reflection warped, showing not his face, but moments from his past, the time he had abandoned someone in need, the time he had stolen, the time he had lied to protect himself. Each memory played out like a ghostly film, every action magnified, every misdeed accentuated. Lucas pressed his hands to the glass, his reflection now a twisted version of himself, mouth moving in mockery, eyes burning with silent accusation. Panic clawed at his chest. He ran to the door, but it was gone, replaced by a blank wall, smooth and unyielding. He screamed, pounding on the surface, begging for release, but only the whispers answered. The room was alive, feeding on his fear and guilt, growing stronger with each heartbeat. Shadows coalesced into shapes that resembled people he had wronged. They reached for him with dark, elongated fingers, their eyes hollow, voices pleading or accusing, or both at once. Lucas sank to the floor, shivering, overwhelmed by the enormity of what he was facing. His mind raced, seeking a way out, but every thought was interrupted by another secret the room revealed. And then something unexpected happened, a moment of clarity. He realized the room was not just tormenting him for punishment, it was demanding acknowledgement, forcing him to confront the parts of himself he had hidden even from himself. Taking a trembling breath, Lucas began to speak aloud. He admitted minor wrongs first, whispering confessions into the cold air. Each admission seemed to dull the intensity of the shadows, the whispers faltering for a moment. Encouraged, he confessed more, regrets, fears, and shame he had never dared to face. The room pulsed, reacting to his words, almost as if testing him, measuring his courage. But the room had one final challenge. A figure appeared from the shadows, a perfect spectral copy of Lucas himself, pointing toward a hidden compartment in the wall. Lucas understood instantly. His darkest secret, the one act he had buried so deep it felt erased from existence, lay there. To escape, he would have to confront it fully, face its truth, and survive the terror it would unleash. Heart pounding, Lucas arose, his resolve strengthening. The room waited, silent now, the whispers holding their breath. Lucas's legs shook as he approached the hidden compartment the spectral version of himself had indicated. The room was eerily silent now, but the air felt thick, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for him to make the next move. Every instinct screamed to run, to hide, to pretend none of this was real, but he knew that hesitation would cost him. He reached out and opened the compartment. Inside lay a small, dust-covered box. Lucas's hands trembled as he lifted it, and the whispers returned instantly, louder and more mocking than before. They seemed to pierce directly into his mind, reminding him of every lie, every betrayal, every secret he had thought safely hidden. His heart hammered in his chest as the shadows around him thickened, forming shapes that seemed to leer and reach for him. The box creaked open, and inside, carefully wrapped in faded velvet, was the object that symbolized his darkest secret, the evidence of a betrayal so profound that even Lucas had tried to erase it from memory. A memory surged in his mind, the face of the person he had betrayed, the moment it happened, the guilt that had never let him rest. The room responded instantly, walls warping, shadows twisting violently, and the whispers forming a deafening chorus of accusations. The spectral Lucas stepped closer, pointing at the object, eyes filled with a silent command. Confront it. Lucas's legs nearly gave way under the weight of fear, but he forced himself to kneel, opening the velvet to fully reveal the truth he had buried for so long. As his gaze fell upon it, a wave of nausea and terror washed over him. The room seemed to pulse with life, shadows forming shapes of the person he had wronged, their eyes accusing, their mouths opening in silent screams. For a moment, Lucas thought he would faint, overwhelmed by the horror of his own actions made manifest. But then a spark of defiance ignited within him. He whispered aloud, voice trembling, admitting the betrayal, naming the lies, confessing the guilt he had carried for years. His words echoed around the room, and for the first time, the whispers faltered. The shadows recoiled, twisting in anger and then hesitation. Lucas continued, his voice growing stronger with each confession, confronting the shame he had hidden even from himself. The room shuddered violently, the mirror shattering into 1,000 shards, reflecting fragmented images of his worst memories. The chair in the center of the room rose slowly, hovering, then fell back with a resounding thud, shaking the floor beneath him. Finally, the spectral Lucas nodded, fading into the darkness. The room's oppressive energy began to dissipate, the shadows retreating into the walls. The whispers became faint, then silent, leaving only the echo of Lucas's own breath. He felt a strange exhaustion wash over him, as if the room had drained everything but left him alive. Then, almost imperceptibly, a faint glow appeared where the door had been. The room had acknowledged his courage. It would release him, but not without leaving its mark. Lucas understood that this experience would haunt him forever, that some part of the room's darkness would remain inside him, lingering, waiting, whispering. With trembling hands, he stepped toward the door, unsure of what lay beyond, but knowing that leaving meant survival, and that the room's true terror had only just revealed itself. Lucas hesitated for a moment before stepping through the faintly glowing doorway. The cold night air hit his face like a shock, and he gasped, taking in the familiar surroundings outside the mansion. The wind whispered through the broken trees, carrying the faint scent of decay, yet compared to the suffocating presence inside, it felt like freedom. His knees were weak and his hands trembled, but he forced himself to move forward. The mansion loomed behind him, silent now, almost peaceful, but he knew better. Its walls had witnessed everything, fed on his fears and absorbed his secrets. It had released him, yes, but it would not forget. The key he still clutched in his hand felt heavier than before, a reminder of the dark covenant he had unknowingly entered. As Lucas made his way down the cracked driveway, he tried to shake the memories, the whispers, the shadows, the spectral version of himself pointing to his deepest guilt. Every step felt heavier, as though the mansion's influence clung to him, invisible chains binding his thoughts. He had survived the room, but its mark lingered, gnawing at the edges of his mind. He glanced back once, and for an instant he thought he saw the door he had left behind, a dark slit in the mansion's crumbling wall. But when he blinked, it was gone. The mansion remained just a ruin, silent and unmoving, yet Lucas knew it was alive in ways no one could understand. That night, in his own room, sleep came reluctantly. Shadows seemed to bather in the corners, whispers curling around his ears even when the house was quiet. He told himself it was imagination, that the horror belonged only to the mansion, but deep down he knew better. The room had touched him, and some part of its consciousness had followed him home. Days passed, but Lucas could not forget. Mirrors seemed to reflect his face differently, showing fleeting shadows behind him. Strange creaks and soft murmurs echoed through his apartment at night. Even in crowded streets, he sometimes felt unseen eyes tracking him. The room's presence was subtle now, lingering in his mind, whispering secrets he thought he had already confessed. And then, one evening, a soft, almost playful whisper slipped into his ears as he walked home through the quiet streets. "We'll meet again." Lucas froze. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He scanned the darkness around him. There was no one, only the wind. Yet the words lingered, curling inside his mind like smoke, carrying a promise and a threat all at once. He understood the truth now. The mansion, the room, the shadows, they were patient, eternal. They did not need to rush. They would wait for the next time he or anyone else allowed curiosity or fear to lead them into their grasp. Lucas continued walking, every step measured, every sound heightened. The world seemed normal again, but he knew it was a fragile illusion. Somewhere, in a place beyond walls and time, the room existed, hungry for secrets, for fears, for the souls who dared enter. And though he had survived, he could feel it in his bones. The room had not released him entirely. Its whispers would echo in his mind forever, reminding him that some darkness cannot be escaped. It only waits for the next unwary heart to enter.